Hi, my name is Carol Williams, and with me I have Hans Læssøe. Hans, you want to say hi?
Hi. I'm yeah, well, I'm here
um,
from Denmark.
yes, I love talking with Hans. He has such a wealth of knowledge and experience that I wanted to share a lot of information on the topic of scenario planning / analysis. It goes by both topics, both names, but we wanted to kind of walk through that topic for today. So Hans, can you please give us a brief description of what you would consider strategic scenario planning?
The most important thing is that when we're talking about strategic planning, we're moving quite a bit into the future. And there's a lot of uncertainties about the future. There's not very many things that are certain about it. One of the things that are certain is that it's going to be different. And in order to imagine that difference, in order to make sure that the strategy that you propose, the targets that you set are relevant for the future in which they're supposed to be at, if you're looking for right now, 2025, 2030, the world will be very different in 2030 compared to now. And having a target of being the world's premium performer on premium supplier of spark plugs may not be a major business. But if you cannot imagine that the auto industry will change into electric cars, you will be inclined, or may be inclined, to move on that strategy, not realizing that the market is evaporating around you. And so strategic planning or strategic scenarios is all about imagining images of the future so that you can relate to them and prepare for them in time.
Okay, that's great. So why do you think that people should use strategic scenarios?
For one thing, for the exact purpose of imagining things and making sure that their strategy is also relevant in the future it's supposed to work. That's one thing. The other thing is it's actually a very effective way of dealing with uncertainties and taking care of or addressing uncertainties without a lot of facts, without a lot of metrics and statistics and analytics and stuff like that. You can simply talk your way through it in a simple workshop. And well, I've been a long time with a toy company, and one of the things I found also, these workshops are fun. They're hard work. It's hard fun. They are hard work. You really need to do system thinking for hours, but they're worth it. And you get some quite good results out of it because you can strengthen the resilience of your strategy.
So it sounds like it's not just about the session itself, but that the risk practitioner is also going to need to do a lot of prep time to really think through things. Is that correct? Or are they going to be relying on the people in the room to talk and to come up with these different scenarios?
So that's one of the steps where I started out making a huge mistake. I was looking at different ways of doing scenarios, and based on a couple of things, we combined our way into the way that we wanted to do it at the Lego group. And we said, okay, let's prepare these scenarios so that people can talk about them and talk about how to address them. And we spent months, I mean, lots of time analyzing and describing and perfecting these and substantiating them with research and everything else, and came up with some very, very good scenarios that led to a good discussion and absolutely nothing. Nothing, because there was no ownership. The head of logistics talked to me afterwards and said, these were great. It was a fun discussion. It was a great discussion. It was a great eye opener. But I can't use these scenarios to come up with a logistic strategy. It doesn't help me. So one of the things I found, so we basically discarded it after that. And I was kind of distraught and say, okay, good idea, it didn't work. And then sometime after, the CEO came down to me and say, Hans, we had some good things with this scenario, but we need to redo it. We need to do it in a way that works because this one obviously didn't work. And I thought about it, and I talked to him and a couple of other guys and found that relevance, ownership, was key. So the risk practitioner's job in the scenario session is to be the process jockey and make sure the process runs and people are challenged. Every bit of content comes from the attendees because they have to own the results. They have to own the scenarios. They have to own the outcomes of it to make sure that it's relevant to them, it's pertinent to them, and they will make decisions on it. They will not make decisions on whatever scientific document you come out that, by the way, talks about something different.
No, I would completely agree with that. I think the same thing happens when people in, say, ERM or whatever risk department that is called in the company, they come up with, well, here are the risks that I see associated with your strategic plan. Well, if ERM is coming up with them, then they're going to say, yeah, I don't know. But if they come up with it and they identify it, then there's a lot more ownership. Same concept here. So
exactly.
Okay, got it.
Ownership is key. And I found that if basically you want to drive action, you want people to make decisions based on this, you want it to have an impact on whatever strategy comes out of it and whatever planning comes out of it. And to that respect, ownership is far more important than accuracy.
Agree.
You shouldn't be dead wrong, but if you're borderline right and you have full buy-in, you'll get a lot better decision than if you're perfectly right with no buy-in.
Absolutely agree, because then you won't get any traction going forward.
Right.
Yep. So it sounds like the prep work that a risk practitioner would have to do is more about coming up with the right process that they need to do, and maybe even some quote unquote rules or boundaries for the conversation, and laying those out at the very beginning. And then from then on, it is all about the people that are in the room. Okay, fantastic.
Some prep material. I have a process. I have some prepared materials to how to base the scenarios, what uncertainties the scenarios are based on. So I have some cards on that I've picked out and say you can discuss these or you can make up your own, and then the time frame.
Okay.
Because one of the things I found is there was one team I did the scenario planning with, and the head of the team say, I know you have set a 4-hour time limit. This is in the morning. We have all day. We will have the time. We will spend the time we need. And I normally plan 1 hour to define what are the outlines of the 4 scenarios I'm working with. And 2.5 hours later, they were not even close. And then they took a break, and I asked the head, should we stop this now and get on with business, or do we plan to get talking all through the weekend? And we decided that, okay, you do some timing. Give us more time that you plan for it, because I don't want to rush it. But when you feel that it's time to move on, let's move on. And you just push us that way. Okay, let's do that.
Okay. Yeah, because I've definitely run into those same kind of conversations where it can go down rabbit trails and just take 5 times longer than you planned. Yeah. And you have to ask yourself, what was the value of that added time? Yes. And there may have been some added value, but not enough to make it worth the time that you could have spent talking about something else.
Right.
Okay. So when it comes to all of this, we talked about the why, the value that people will get out of this, both the executives as well as the risk practitioner. So go ahead and describe for us what the process is that people should expect during a scenario planning session.
Yes. There are a few steps in the process. The first step is that you pick out, when you're looking into the future, you pick out a number of uncertainties that will drive the future. Basically, you ask yourself, okay, I'm looking into now, we have the head of the HR team, the head of HR and his leadership team, and they're working on the HR strategy. That's fine. Now we're looking into 2025, 2030, and we'll be looking at that. What are the key uncertainties that will affect our strategy? It's not about sales or anything else, because that's not an HR concern. This is probably about, okay, now we have people working from home in a large extent. Will we have people who want to be employed and part of a community and part of a team and part of a company and have the certainty of a salary? Or will the best people want to be freelancers? That could be one uncertainty. Both of them are plausible. Are they equally likely? I don't care. The other one could be work hours.
Yeah.
Where you say, okay, my time is sacred. I will work from 9 till 5, not 8:50 to 5:10. Forget about nights and weekends. I have a family life, I have a full life. I will work 9 to 5, and that'll be it. My time is sacred. That's one part. The other part is maybe coming out of the working from home and the freelancing. I will work when it suits me. It could be 6 o'clock in the morning. I could be free between 2 and 4, and I could be working till midnight. That's my job. That's my plan. Now, that could be another dimension of found that was important for an HR strategy to come up with. And you spend I normally bring about 20 different cards, and some of them are obviously relevant because otherwise the discussion takes way too long. And then there are some of them that are more or less relevant, and people talk about what they want. Very often I found that executives say, I need a card that's different. And I always bring a number of blanks so they can make up their own. Quite often, like 1 in 3 teams come up with their own card with 2 different scenarios. And sometimes they're used and sometimes they're not. And if they're good, I'll just put them into my deck and bring them to the next team as well.
So the cards that you're talking about are but like index cards or whatever, that where you've just basically written on there
yes,
the key drivers that you've identified.
I actually have one in my bag here because I just used it. They're looking like this.
Okay. So
this is about location. Do you have open countries? You can move anywhere. You can locate yourself anywhere. Or do you have a closed where you have no foreigners? You cannot move companies in and out. That could be one on location strategy or positioning or something like that. So
okay.
it's kind of like this I have, and I have a battery of about 40 in total by now, but I'm bringing about 20 that are somewhat relevant to the team, and plus a couple of blanks.
Okay, got it.
And by the end of the game, what they do is they take 2 cards and cross them. And now you have this very famous management tool defined by Boston Consulting Group called a 2x2.
Okay. Yep.
And those are the 4 scenarios. Now, the rules of the game are that if they're supposed to be chosen, both of these ends should be plausible. Very likely, not necessary. They should be seen by the team as plausible. And this card and that card should be seen as mutually independent. Reasonably mutually independent.
Okay.
If you do that and you cross them, then this scenario will be significantly different from that scenario, which will be very different from this scenario. So now you have 4 very different plausible scenarios, which you can then start to describe. And that's the second part of the session. That is that the team, using Post-its at first and then sharing, describes one scenario. What does the world look like from our perspective? Not about the macroeconomics or anything like that. We're looking at the HR strategy. How do we recognize the scenario? What does it mean to us? How does that world look? And then we'll go to the opposite corner and say, how does that look? And here the risk practitioner comes in with a role, push them out. Extremes. Don't think about how it's, don't stay within your comfort zone. Try to think somewhat extreme what this could be like and say, okay, this could be, okay, then we're moving out here and then we're moving down there. And then I'll normally spend 40 minutes on the first scenario, 40 minutes on the second scenario. And then I'll spend 20 minutes on the 2 in-betweens, focusing on what differentiates that scenario from the one at top and the one next to it.
So you work on the caddy corners, 40 minutes on each, and then you shift here and do 20 minutes on the 2
20 minutes, yes.
corners.
So now they spent 2 hours on that. And then I give them a break because at this point in time, they have to have done the system 2 thinking for 3 hours. And it's
a lot of thinking.
It's a lot of thinking. And as Kahneman taught me in his book, people have the same approach to thinking as cats do to swimming. They can do it, but they prefer not to.
Yeah.
So this is hard. This is truly hard work.
But with a really great outcome.
With a really great outcome.
That's the important part that you have to keep reminding them if they start pushing back during this process around not wanting to get outside of their comfort zone.
Right.
Or things like that.
The fun part of it is that the scenarios they have just described is just a middle step. It's just to drive your imagination Because once they come back after the break, now we will like them to address issues, to identify issues. An issue could be an opportunity, and it could be a risk.
Okay.
Depending on what you decide to do about it.
True.
I mean, if you don't do something about it, it could be a risk. If you do something about it and pursue it, it could be an opportunity. You choose. I mean, we haven't gotten to that yet. So we talk about issues rather than risks and opportunities, because that depends on that. This is decided later. And I ask them again using Post-its to make sure that we have everybody heard and people are not getting, the CEO comes up and say, this is an opportunity and this is an issue, and everybody looks in that direction and nobody looks in the opposite direction. To avoid those kind of human biases, I use Post-its. Should have put stocks in companies. I use Post-its. I use a lot of them. But I use Post-its to have people address issues, write down issues, and they get about 15 minutes to do so. Now, any one issue can come out of one scenario, or two scenarios, all four scenarios for that matter, or scenario A plus something my mom told me yesterday. I don't care. It's a matter of triggering your imagination to come up with issues that your current definition of strategy hasn't encountered for. If it's something that's already taken care of in your strategy, it's not adding value. So forget about those. Look at the issues that are not addressed in your strategy. Once that's done, then we start sharing. And when we start sharing, you go back to the 2x2 in a model I call a Papa model. On one axis, you have this I don't believe is going to happen, but it could, or this I do believe happened, but it may not. And it's the only split. Do you believe it's going to happen within your strategic horizon, or don't you believe it's going to happen? Okay. There is no, no math, no statistics. On the other axis, I have, is this slow or fast? Now, this is somewhat tricky because that depends on your maneuverability.
Yeah.
If you find that you have to change a marketing strategy within 8 months, that's a slow issue because you can do that. If you have to change your logistics setup in 8 months, that's fast because you can't do that unless you're very prepared.
Yeah.
So that's the difference between slow and fast. Can you deal with it when it comes? Can you cross the bridge when you get to it? Or do you need to prepare having a bridge with you when you come to the river?
So a key point in the slow to fast is that it's not about saying slow is 8 to 12 months. No. Or fast is 2 months, because it all depends on the context of the issue that's been identified.
Yes.
Key.
Then we get to the Papa. If you take the slow, that's a park. We don't expect it to happen. And if it happens, we can deal with it then. Don't waste more time now. And that's a very important message to executives. There are things you don't need to do, because there are tons of things they do need to do.
Yes, I agree.
Then we look at the A, the first A. This is where the likelihood is high. We expect it to happen, but it happens slowly. These are trend-wise things. This could be urbanization. It could be aging. When you talk about PR people, it's talking about people's approach to work, working from home, working from office, or all other kind of things. They will not change overnight, but we expect them to change. We expect the 15 years of today to want to work differently from what we're doing. Absolutely. Using more online and less and so forth, and don't want to use CO2 and, by the way, family time to commute and stuff like that. Yeah. So we expect it to be different. Okay, these things we need to adapt to, which means we need somebody to look at how do we measure the way it's how fast it's going, and what do we do about it as we gradually follow the trend. But this is setting the course of the supertanker. There is no need to be worried about this. There's no need to be dramatic about it. They're just things that we need to be, okay, address that this is the way the world is probably changing, and we will follow it. And if it stops changing, we will stop following anywhere, we'll stop changing. So we'll just monitor and flow with the time.
So adaptability is what that one really comes under.
That's the adapt.
Okay.
The second P is where it's unlikely to happen, but if it happens fast.
Okay.
This is prepare. This is where we need to be prepared. This is a lot of the strategic risks that we will have. They will be up in that box. It may happen, and if it does, we need to be prepared in order to deal with it. For some companies, it could be a Brexit, it could be a trade war, it could be changes in political landscapes, it could be change of legislation, it could be whatever.
The economic element.
Economics and stuff like that, that we, should we say, dramatic changes, disruptions of any kind, they are up there. We don't expect them to happen, but if they do, we will need to be prepared for them. And trying to act once we've seen them is too little too late.
Okay.
So that's action, where,
so basically developing action plans, but not having to take action on them.
Right. Right. We may want to mitigate it. It's pretty much like dealing with a strategic risk. You may want to mitigate it or be prepared for it, but definitely you have some element or some form of a business continuity plan should it happen.
Okay. Got it.
Now comes the funny part, the other A, the act issues.
Okay.
Now remember, the leadership team came up with their own choice of uncertainties, based on which they described their own scenarios, based on which they came up with their own issues. And now they're prioritizing and say, this is going to happen fast. And we haven't taken care of it in our strategy. Maybe we should. I had a fun session with one team, one financial team, where they had these 4 scenarios and stuff like that. And one of the issues came up was automated transactional handling. All financial transactions will be 100% automated. And that issue came up, and they had a discussion about it. And the head of the team, the head of the finance team said, this is funny, because this about automated transactional planning, handling is actually present in all 4 scenarios. But we don't have it in our strategy.
That's a gap.
Guys, I think we have a hole here.
Yeah.
So now
because really it sounds like the issues identification piece is really a gap analysis between your current strategy and the 4 scenarios that got identified, and saying, what are the gaps that we need to fill, and then prioritizing the gaps. That's like the easy way to. Okay.
And most often I see act issues coming in as new must-win battles in the strategic planning process. I have done a couple of dozens scenario sessions with different teams. I have never, ever had less than 2 act issues. Things they found, oops, we haven't taken care of that, but we recognize we really need to put that into our strategy to make sure it's resilient for the future. And if you have, when I started doing this with Lego Group, I had discussion with my boss, the CFO, about how do we target this? What's the target for this? And the CFO said, okay, you're going to do for every business unit, that's 21 sessions for this case. But it's only half a day. I mean, it's a 4-hour session with each team that's the amount of time you take from them. So I believe if you, between the 21, come up with 10 act issues, then you've done well. We came up with 65 act issues. Which meant that when I reported that back to the CEO, when I reported back on the process and how it was going to the CFO, he asked, how many act issues do you have combined? I said 65, 66, something like that. And he said, okay, that tells me one thing. This process is hereby forever on absolutely 100% mandatory if you do any planning that's more than 3 years into the future. Because he found this was absolutely, he said, every team had some. Which means every single time we spent 4 hours working on this, we strengthened the strategy. The team strengthened the strategy, and the process jockey was just there. Most of the teams then went on with a 5th hour And that was an hour they decided to do where they say, okay, let's look at these 1, 2, 3, 4 act issues and decide who is doing what by when and how do we monitor that to make sure that this is actually going to be happening. And that went into strategic planning and business planning.
Yeah, so really that 5th hour was spent determining the accountability portion of it. So now that we've got an act issue, we now need to have who's going to be responsible for it and hold them accountable to it, and how are we going to know that it's being taken care of?
We agreed on how do we do it. We simply, should we say, outlined the tactical implementation plan of how to address this issue.
Yeah.
The must-win. How do we win the must-win battle?
So at a corporate level, when you come away with that many, that seems very daunting. That would appear very daunting. It's a very long list of 65, So even if the
but
company
nobody does the 65.
Yeah.
Nobody does more than nobody does a handful.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Most companies I know of do really well at about 5, not more than that, because the attention gets dispersed and they start getting very scattered and being able to actually address things. And so the action take longer, or they start missing things. So how do you prioritize even within the act items when you start getting a long list?
It's not that difficult, because here the CFO got 4 and the head of purchasing got 3 and the head of HR got 5 and the head of marketing US got 2 and the head of so every team had 1, 2, 3, 4 in a couple of cases maybe 5 issues they had to address, but most of them had 1, 2, or 3.
Okay, so it's not about 5 at the corporate level, it's 5 at at the executive level. So
at executive level. Doing it at corporate level, I wouldn't know to which extent. It could be, I mean, if you have a very active board of directors, you could do it with the executive committee and the board of directors and have a session with them and figure out what do we do on a corporate level. But even on that level, they will come up with 3 or 4 act issues that they needed to address. And okay, these would be the message from the board. These are the issues that we want you to on a corporate level. I've never, there was one session where they came up with 8 or 9 act issues, but that was a session where it was an engineering team, and the head of engineering said, I would like to run this scenario session before we define our strategy. And then we went to, then they of course got a long list, a longer list of 9 or 10 must-win battles to make sure this strategy, because they didn't have anything. Then they prepared their strategic plan and was almost ready to say, okay, this is it. And then he came back to me saying, now I want to do it again. So they used 2 different crosses, 4 different scenarios, and came up with, I think, 1 or 2 additional issues that they wanted to address in their strategy. And that's a different way of using it. But he simply said, this makes sense to me. So I would like to spend 2 afternoons on this rather than 1, and have the first one direct where am I looking for, what am I going to do, what must-win battles, instead of us sitting at a desk guessing what our must-win battle should be.
I was going to say, that seems like that would be a very efficient use of it, right? As opposed to a lot of companies going off and having
the head of engineering is an engineer, and efficiency drives him. He's thinking FMEA.
Well, I mean, a lot of companies spend days at an offsite talking about what their strategy is going to be and everything. And then they're going to come back and do this to basically double check their work and then still have to go back and modify it. It seems very logical. Right. I can't believe that. It's very logical that you would actually do it before the offsite or make it part of the offsite.
Right.
To feed into the development of the strategy.
I have witnessed one such strategy session, a 3-day offsite strategy session. We were a couple of people working there as consultants to support that and to run it. And they were very adamant that they should have the time to discuss, and it was theirs, and we should come in if we were asked. But they wanted us to have as a backup to check up things and stuff. Fine by me. That session I agreed with the other consultant, was the Grand National Steeplechase of hobby horse riding. I mean, they were basically each and every one of them talking out of the perception that rule number one, my area has got to be bigger. Rule number two, it's not going to be smaller. Rule number three, rule number one applies again. So they were fighting basically between themselves on how to strengthen the company through their mindset so that they individually in the leadership team could be more powerful. Total waste of time.
Yeah.
By the way, they didn't agree on a strategy when it's finished.
Is that surprising?
No.
Wow.
Nope.
So in other words, if you have a leadership team that is very focused on, the phrase I've used is kingdom building, where it's all about making my area bigger, everything like that. You're not thinking about the company as a whole and working together to strengthen the company, then it's going to be very difficult to achieve the value out of these sessions.
In that case, I think it relies on the board or the CEO, depending on who's the worst of the executives, to fire the dudes. Because if an executive team cannot work as a team for the benefit of the company, you should find somebody who could.
Yep, agree. Well, and the idea of using the
That said, it
board.
does happen.
Yeah. Well, using the board, kind of going back to that observation, to me, I see a huge ton of value in that compared to having the different individual departments run this scenario planning from the perspective of the board may come up with a completely different list of act issues because they're not in it day to day. They're seeing it from the really big picture, independent, looking down at the company saying, here's where I see it from a governance and how we're running the company.
Yes. And if the company's managed well, the reason they're not seeing it is it's because it's taken care of, well taken care of. They've never heard of us. Oh, we have a big issue with currency fluctuations. They never heard about it. They simply don't look at it. Nope. We have 6 guys in treasury who has in complete control of that.
Yep.
So we don't worry about it anymore. It's under control. So they will be tending to look at things, coming up with 5 act issues, and 4 of which the company is saying, we're doing this already. But we haven't heard about it. No, because it's a standard operating procedure and we don't waste your time on standard operating procedures.
No, but what that could do is identify communication opportunities that maybe the executives need to be telling the board, these are areas of concern. Let me tell you about how we're handling those within the company.
Right.
Check. Okay, the board has a level of comfort now. They're good to go.
Yeah.
Good. All right, move on
This
to
process. This process came out of it was research based on the formula that if you copy from one person, it's plagiarism and it's copyism, and you shouldn't do that. It's unethical. If you copy from 5 people, it's research.
That is correct. That's what a lot of people do.
Yes, and that's exactly what I've done too. It's a copy of a couple of this here and there and little there. By the end of the day, it ended up in an article in Strategic Finance. It then became a case study for Harvard Business School. And the case study has been used in a number of other universities that I know of, plus probably a lot I don't know of. So it's been, and now it's also, or rather it was also described in the ERM's Strategic Risk Management Implementation Guide as the way to do it. Not by me, by the way. We had another guy he could do a better job writing it up than I could. But the process is there. But it's a half-day process. And it's quite simple. The discussions are not easy.
So I think that's a key point for that's a key point for the risk practitioners. Don't try to sell the time short. You're going to need the time. Don't try to rush it. The executives are going to, or the people in the room are going to need that. So to kind of circle back on the, because I was going to ask about who should be the people in the room. Well, it sounds like it needs to be based on if it's departmental level versus executive level or board. But if it's departmental level, who in the room? Who should be in the room?
Those that decide how to plan for the outcoming future. I mean, you shouldn't do strategic scenario planning for a period of less than 3 years because the world doesn't change that fast.
Yeah.
Unless, of course, you're moving into a new business area.
Agree.
We have Apple as a computer company. Suddenly they want to move into music and do iTunes. There, I would probably do some scenario planning because they're moving into an industry they don't know much about. Leveraging the technology they had, yes, that's fine, but they don't know much about the market and market dynamics and stuff like that. So there I would use it. But apart from that, on departmental functional level, I'll use a leadership team or the leader and those specialists that decides how to decides how to deal with the long-term future or whatever we have. That would be the group I would use it. And I could use it on any level. I've done it on projects as well. I've been involved in business projects that they knew it would take between 2 and 3 years to implement it, and it'll have to be fully operational and perfectly working 4 years from now. In that case, we use scenario planning to make sure that up and running, fully working 4 years from now. What does that mean? Because it may mean something differently than what if it had been working today.
Got it. Okay. So it sounds like what would be like your 3-sentence description of what people should expect as the outcome coming from this kind of session? If you had to summarize it.
Yes. The most important outcome is the PAPA model. The prioritized list of issues being POC, adapt, prepare, and act. That's the key outcome. You can then add on action plans for the act issues if you want to, but you can also do that later. And as I said, the scenarios is just a middle step. It's just like in finance, they have a concept called activity-based costing. The purpose of activity-based costing is to relate your cost to customers and services and products, but you can't do that from the chart of accounts. So you move into activities and then you relate the activities to customers and so forth. It's the same you do here. You cannot imagine the issues if you're just looking at the world as it is today and how you know it. You have to imagine a different world. You have to see perspectives and say, okay, based on that, now I can imagine this. So it's an imagination driver, and that's what we use the scenarios for.
So I think a couple key takeaways that I've heard is one, risk practitioners have only need to focus on prepping for the process, not coming up with the scenarios. 2, that there needs to be ownership of the scenarios and the issues coming from the people that are in the room. And 3, that people are going to have to be prepared to step out of their comfort zone. This is going to get them thinking way outside of what they do day to day, and they need to be prepared for that.
Yes.
Okay.
I've had people in their late 30s doing this for an afternoon, telling me the day after, when I came home, I sat down in a chair and fell asleep. It's been the hardest working day I've had for years. Yes,
well, it's because people are not used to using their brains in the way that
they're
going to
not
have to
used
use
to.
them during this.
I mean, concentrated thinking, challenging yourself for what it ends up being a 4-hour period. That's hard work.
Yes, it does. Yes, it is. Well, thank you so much, Hans. I know, so this process is talked about in your book, Prepare to Dare. And so we are providing a link below this interview for people to go check out that book. I love the book. If reading the blog, it's linked everywhere. And so it's a great resource for those that really want to get out of the traditional ways of doing risk and really start building the strength of your company and the practices within it. So Hans, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to our next one.
Bye.